Not so long ago, in a world full of strife, a man born a wolf, living a dual life. With magic in his veins, he walked the school hall, learning the arts, answering the call. But fear was a cloak he had to wear tight, hiding his truth, keeping darkness from light. Those who were scared turned away in despair, yet he bore the burden, he chose to take care. Now the times have changed, the monster's no longer scared. He's retired from magic, but his stories still flare, with tales of heroes, of legends so grand, selling dreams of the past across this vast land. In the shadows he lingered, where darkness would creep, protecting those kindly, never losing sleep. A guardian of secrets, a keeper of lore, he wandered through echoes, hearts wanting much more. No longer the wolf, but a sage with a pen, turning back the pages, reliving back then. His stories weave magic in the minds of the young, of battles and triumphs, where songs will be sung. Now the times have changed, the monster's no longer scared. He's retired from magic, but his stories still flare, with tales of heroes, of legends so grand, selling dreams of the past across this vast land. Listen closely, hear the whispers in the breeze, of knights and of dragons beneath the ancient trees. The wolf in his wisdom has so much to share, from magic to courage, loving hearts laid bare. So gather round, children, let the stories unfold, of a man who had magic but chose to be bold. Through tales of old, his spirit survives, a wolf in disguise, in every heart he thrives. Now the times have changed, the monster's no longer scared. He's retired from magic, but his stories still flare, with tales of heroes, of legends so grand, selling dreams of the past across this vast land. So remember this lesson as you look to the skies, even hidden beneath, we see with our hearts, not our eyes. For every wolf's journey, there's magic in the tales of kindness and courage, where love prevails. Not so long.
Hello everyone, and welcome back. Oh, now I can see that my usual mistakes have been happening as usual, as I'm behind my decorations. That doesn't do me any good to be behind them. There we go. Come on. There we are. Yeah. Started to get some decorations up, so... Oh, Harperville P2 at Tom T. Hall. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Trying to get some decorations up. I need to reformat them because they're from my old windows, so they don't fit right. The ones outside work pretty well. I need to do some more work on it, though. I don't have my tree up in here yet. I don't have anything else going. But yeah, it's December, and this is the first... Well, it's technically the third stream of December, but it's the first reading stream of December. What month is it? This year has gone by a lot faster than I feel like it should have. Which is in itself strange, but what are we gonna do? Time goes on. And we're, what, 39 followers away from the goal, which, still isn't bad. Hey, Matsu, welcome in. Congrats on getting first. Yes, finally. That was bad when we raided out and it was she had already ended stream. I will catch her next time. Because I just scrolled to my list to see who was on, and she said she was on. So, I don't know. There's always a little delay in streaming, though. I'm just like, I have to open the window just to make sure they're still there before I'll try to do a raid. But, anyway. We really need to find a way to do a group reading of Christmas Carol. Kind of like we did with Macbeth. Just recast that. Be interesting. Say, who would we cast for all of it? I mean, it would be interesting. I mean, I have no problem being somewhat ghostly. Yeah, we really need to find some time we can all get that together. Nothing weird about fading out. I mean, it's one of my emotes. Well, I'm not going to give up my Scooby snacks if I'm playing a ghost. Strange enough, I'm reading The Mummy. I guess I should switch over to that window. Boop. Oh, I did have it set to fade. Really need to find a page turning one. We're over halfway through this book. Let's see, what chapter are we on? Chapter 24 out of 33? So 9 chapters left. I could possibly finish this book by the end of the year. Then I have to figure out what to read next year. I think I had a book in mind, but I don't remember what it was now. I'll remember it. Ask me who I once was. I don't think I've ever had to strain my voice doing ghosts, though. I do have to strain somewhat to do the mummy. Welcome in. We'll have to, I guess, put it up on the collab board on the server to see who wants to jump in on it. Let's see. Yeah, it's been 2 weeks since the last time I read The Mummy. Do you remember who and where we were? Oh. Okay, the current King of Ireland is trying to win back Spain for the former Spanish former Spanish royalty. Really does make me wonder what they were thinking of when they wrote this. Because this is still supposed to be the future. It's like the future for us. And it's 2126. So it's still got another 100 years before the events of this book is supposed to happen. But to do that, well, no, I guess we could, kinda. We'd have to have a complete computer blowout to put us back to where we're having to rediscover electricity. Well, not rediscover. Make everything more battery powered anyway. So I guess technically this could still happen. It's strange to think about a book that's supposed to be 100 years in our future, written 200 years ago. I'm never going to get over that notion. And they're avoiding any comments about the Americas on purpose. So, if we're ready, everyone sit back, relax, enjoy. I've got like cafe mocha. That's what I'm hydrating with tonight. I figured coffee's gonna be good enough. That's like hot chocolate coffee, so tasty. Anyway, we'll get into The Mummy. Chapter 24. Notwithstanding the danger of his situation, Roderick was delighted at the sight of the allied army. "Now we shall fight," he cried, "and not be thrown down like dogs from the walls to perish. I could not bear to see my brave soldiers so sacrificed, but now that we shall meet fairly upon the open field, to struggle hand in hand, man to man, we cannot fail to conquer." "Heaven grant us victory," said Edric, sighing. "And why so it will be, man," repeated Roderick gaily. "Come, come, rouse and cheer thy spirits, for the moment of glory ought not surely be that of my doom." The force of the enemy had, in the meantime, rapidly advanced, and the two armies were now opposite to each other, the river curving around Roderick like a silver band. The situation of the Irish hero was, indeed, now become hazardous in the extreme, and if defeated, he could neither retreat nor advance without being exposed to imminent peril, as the river lay before him, and his rear was open to attacks from the town. But neither Roderick nor his soldiers ever contemplated the possibility of defeat. They breathed nothing but victory, and, as the confidence of success often assures it, they had hitherto found themselves invincible, principally from the firm belief they entertained that they really were so. Roderick divided his army into 3 parts, and determining to lead the van himself, he gave the command of one of the other divisions to Lord Arthur O'Neill, son of the Earl of Tyrone, and confided the other, which consisted entirely of Spaniards, to the conduct of the Spanish general, Don Alvarez Reparada, upon whose prudence he knew he might confidently rely, whilst he retained Edric the doctor and Alexis the Greek page from Zoe immediately about his own person. The battle soon raged with terrific grandeur, the shouts and cries of the combatants mingling horribly with the roar of the cannon, which echoed from the walls of the town, seemed to leap from hill to hill, and reverberate in the distance like peals of rolling thunder. Roderick, in the meantime, performed prodigies of valor. Not satisfied with directing the movement of his troops, he fought bravely, sword in hand, like a common soldier, with all that prodigious energy and unexampled good fortune which had previously induced the belief amongst the lower classes of Spaniards of his being assisted by supernatural agency. The square was attacked and seemed upon the point of giving way, but when Roderick saw its danger, he threw himself into the center, and the soldiers were inspired with unwonted courage, and, fighting like lions about to be despoiled of their prey, repulsed the enemy with tremendous slaughter. In fact, nothing could resist the valor of Roderick's arm. Like Homer's Achilles, he seemed ready to triumph even over fate itself. An unexpected occurrence, however, notwithstanding his prowess, was very near turning the tide of the battle against him. Lord Arthur O'Neill, whom he had placed at the head of one of his divisions, though brave as an individual, was nothing of its chief, and unequal to the responsibility of the task he had undertaken, stood hesitating and uncertain what to do, whilst the moment for action passed away. His division had been sent round to attack the enemy in the rear, and Roderick, having advanced further than he would have done had he not descended upon their assistance, their inaction seemed likely to produce the most fatal consequences. Edric saw Lord Arthur's uncertainty, and, comprehending in an instant both the cause and its effects, he put himself at the head of a few men and galloped to his relief. Arthur, bewildered and overwhelmed, willingly resigned his command, and Edric, leaving his division to the charge, changed instantly into fortune of the day. The victory that followed was decisive. The combating in the front against Roderick, astonished at hearing the din of battle in the rear, wavered and became irresolute, whilst disorder being once thrown against such a mass of men, horses, and ammunition wagons, its consequences were irreparable. The rout soon became general. The French and the Spaniards fell over each other in dismay, whilst in some instances their confusion was so excessive that they turned arms upon their own troops, mistaking them for those of their opponents. The pursuit of the flying foe being confided to the Spanish division of Roderick's army, that vicious monarch returned himself to the triumph to his camp before the city. Gloom hung over the walls of Seville, as that proud city expected to become instantly the prey of the conqueror. Roderick, however, finding the garrison were still determined to resist, and that his own soldiers were exhausted by the fatigue they had undergone, resolved to defer the attack until the next day. Then, retiring to his tent, he ordered his officers and nobles to be summoned to hold a council of war as to their future proceedings. The crowd had, in consequence of the summons, already collected around the monarch when Edric appeared amongst them. Roderick saw him, and hastily rushing forward, clasped him hand in his arms. "My dearest friend," cried he, "yesterday you saved my life, but today you have preserved my honor, and I do not attempt to thank you, for I feel the utter incompetency of words to express my feelings. Do not, however, look miserable, Arthur," continued he, addressing the unfortunate general, "for I do not blame you. It was my fault for putting you in a situation you were not fully competent to fill. For the future, you and Edric shall change places, and then I trust, whilst I have still the pleasure of employing my friends, the interests of the state will not suffer." A page now appeared, wearing a riband, attached to which were fastened some glittering crosses. "All is well," said Roderick, taking the riband in his hand. "Edric," continued he, "I hope you will oblige your friend by accepting these splendid baubles from his hand. I can confer no additional honor upon you in this sight, but they may aid in establishing your authority amongst the soldiers you in the future will command, who regard these trinkets with respect." Edric gracefully bowed assent, and kneeling before the monarch, received his new honors with as much grace as Roderick bestowed them, the assembled officers and nobles pressing around and offering their congratulations. Whatever they might say, however, no one present really felt a tenth part of the delight experienced by Dr. Entwerfen upon this occasion. His transport, indeed, quite defies description, for he danced, sang, jumped, nay, he absolutely screamed with rapture. Till at last, quite unable otherwise to give vent to the violence of his emotions, he sprang to a pillar of the tent, and clinging round it, embraced it with all his strength. All these antics had been slyly watched and enjoyed by Roderick, even though the circle that surrounded him. He lost sight of the doctor, however, when he darted away, and it was not till the officers and nobles dispersed that the king discovered his learned friend, to his infinite amusement, was still hugging the post. It had already been observed that the unconquerable love of mischief mingled with the thousand good qualities that formed the composition of Roderick, and that he was continually getting into scrapes and playing tricks upon the unhappy personages who happened to fall in his way, though his invincible good humor and a certain indescribable degree of bonne enfant, particular to his character, rendered it quite impossible for any one seriously to resent his pranks. It was not, indeed, in nature for any human creature to be long angry with Roderick, and thus being certain of not giving lasting offence, whenever he was not positively engaged in war, the restless activity of his disposition made him frolic about, like a spoiled and petted child, who, even at the very moment of his sins being forgiven, was occupied entirely in plotting some new exploit. Under these circumstances, it may be easily imagined what an infinite fund of amusement the confiding simplicity of Dr. Entwerfen had proved to Roderick, and innumerable had been the tricks he had played upon him off and on during the long and tedious sojourn in the Isle of Leon. The important events that had since occurred had, however, entirely occupied the monarch's attention, and the poor doctor had been suffered to enjoy a long respite till this sudden view of his unabated enthusiasm presented an opportunity too tempting for the laughter-loving monarch to resist. Accordingly, that evening, one of Roderick's pages, affecting an air of profound secrecy, presented the doctor with a mysterious bag containing several small balls of dough and a billet from the king, in which he informed the doctor that these were the balls when boiled, would be converted into gunpowder of such amazing strength and efficacy that 10 grains of it would be sufficient to blow up a whole city, and having become possessed by accident of their invaluable secret of their composition, he wished them to use them for the destruction of Seville, and not having the whole camp so skilful an experimentally philosopher as the doctor, he had determined to confide their preparation exclusively to his care. This is not C4. But they're kind of describing it. Doughy explosive. It is impossible for words to do justice to the importance that swelled in the breast of the doctor as he pursued his epistle. He strutted, puffed himself out, and did his very utmost to look big, a feat he doubtless might have contrived to accomplish, had not nature perversely determined to counteract his endeavors, and confined his stature to about 4 feet 11. It was, however, he certainly did make the most of himself, and firmly being resolved not to lose a single instant of putting the designs of the king into execution, he hastened to a vacant place between the camp and the city, where some cauldrons had been hastily erected for cooking the soldiers' food, and there commenced his operations. In the meantime, Roderick, who had no idea the doctor would be so expeditious in his movements, was busily engaging in superintending the removal of the wounded, and in giving orders of the assault which was to take place upon the following day. He had indeed much to do, for awfully heavy is the responsibility of a general who is not entirely divested of feeling for his men, and the heart of Roderick, though a mistaken thirst for glory had made him an emperor, was kind and generous, nay, even tender to the extreme. Urged by his compassion, he thus could not rest satisfied after the more arduous labors of the day were over, without visiting himself the hospitals of the sick. He saw their wounds dressed, and tried to soften their pains with kindly spoken words to them, and praised their valor. Thus employed, he passed from tent to tent. The eyes of his soldiers beamed with rapture at his approach, and even in the agonies of death they raised their feeble voices to call down blessings upon his head. Alexis followed his master in the excursion. His fine eyes sparkled with pleasure as they followed the godlike form of Roderick through the crowd. The monarch, indeed, himself, started with amazement as, turning suddenly, he accidentally met their gaze. This page, he said to Edric, who happened to be near, possesses a glance of fire. I really never saw more expressive features. It is often the case, returned Edric calmly, as he assisted one of the surgeons to bind the arm of a wounded soldier. The dumb frequently employ gestures to make themselves understood, and their features insensibly become more expressive from the muscles being more frequently brought into play. You fought like a hero, my brave fellow, said Roderick to the poor man Edric had been assisting. I hope your hurt is not serious. And if it were through my heart, said the man, it's no more than I'd be proud to bear for your majesty any day of my life. These Irish, sighed an old Andalusian soldier who lay near and happened to understand them. As brave as lions in the field, but gentle as doves when they're in the chamber. Have your wants also been attended to? Asked Roderick. Oh, bless your majesty, returned the soldier. If the devil does help you when you are fighting, I'm sure it is God's own spirit that makes you so good to your soldiers afterwards. If the devil helped me today, said Roderick, laughing, I am sure I am much obliged to his satanic majesty, for I never was in greater peril. Do not look so grave, Edric. You know I am only joking, and whatever my tongue may say, my heart only feels gratitude where it is really due. And as he spoke, he devoutly crossed himself. I know, said Edric gravely, that your heart is infinitely better than your head. The fault of my countrymen, cried Eric again, smiling. Or rather the fault of nature, for they, poor souls, can't help it. Our imagination are so vivid that, like a restive horse, they're apt to take a bit in their teeth and gallop away at full speed, in spite of all the sage Dame Reason, who still keeps uselessly pulling on the rein, can do to prevent them. As soon as the more important duties of his station were fulfilled, Roderick intended upon paying a visit to Dr. Entwerfen to discover that its effect had been produced upon the doctor's mind by his treacherous letter. But Edric, proposing they should see the fair Swiss, as common politeness required they should inquire after her harm, the poor doctor was driven entirely from his thoughts. A separate tent had been pitched for the reception of M. de Mallet and his daughter, and when our friends entered it, they found that the worthy gentleman quite recovered, and his lovely daughter reclining upon a kind of couch, and looking more beautiful than ever. Her angelic features had, it is true, lost the animation they before possessed, but their present languor made them infinitely more interesting than their former energy. Softness was indeed the characteristic of Pauline's beauty. Her figure, though slight and sylphic, was yet round and full enough to please the voluptuary. Her complexion was exquisitely fair, but the rosy tint glowed on her cheeks, whilst her clear blue eyes and golden hair gave her the look of a seraph. And while she raised those bright blue eyes in gratitude to Edric, her look sank deep into his soul, and he thought he had never before seen beauty. Such was Pauline, and when she spoke, Edric, as he listened in rapture to the soft, melting tones of her melodious voice, felt he could no longer resist, but yielded up his heart, a willing captive to her charms. Yes, the calm, the reasoning, the philosophic Edric was actually in love. He, who had despised and ridiculed the passion, who had affected no doubt of its very existence, was now become one of its most devoted victims. Roderick was almost as much charmed as Edric with the beauty of Pauline, and as the circumstance that had first introduced her to their notice formed the striking contrast to the softness and delicacy of her present appearance, that it was scarcely possible to suppose that she was the same person. A feeling of curiosity mingled with interest, and she excited. When our friends entered the room, M. de Mallet rose to receive them. I know not how to thank you, he said, his voice almost stifled with emotion. My own life was of little value, but for that this dear child... He could not proceed. Roderick shook the offered hand. My dear sir, answered he, talk not of thanks. Edric and myself were all too well repaid in seeing you thus recovered, and I am sure we shall ever esteem the day when we were so fortunate as to be of service to you, as the happiest of our lives. You are too good, exclaimed M. de Mallet. Too good. and he could no longer restrain his tears. Roderick was deeply affected, and could not bear to see an old man weep, and he again took M. de Malet's hand, pressing it respectfully to his lips. "My dear sir," he exclaimed, "what have I been yet able to do for you is nothing, but if you return with me to Ireland, I may be able—"
"Hush, my good friend," replied M. de Malet. "I do not doubt your kindness nor your power, but I have had too much of professions."
"My father," said Pauline, imposing her soft, sweet voice, "has suffered much. Forgive him if he seems ungrateful to your kindness, but repeated disappointments sour the spirit. We have seen such but trouble," and her voice trembled as she spoke. "Alas, you have not been exempt from trouble. We shall dare complain," exclaimed Edric in a soft voice as tremulous as her own. Pauline turned her beautiful eyes upon him. "Pardon me, sir," said she, "that I have not before thanked you. Be assured it has not been for want of feeling your kindness, but sometimes the heart is too full for utterance." "Thanks from your lips, madam," returned Roderick, "would be a reward for any service." Pauline blushed. "You too, sir, were kindness itself," rejoined she. "Think not I am insensible to your favours, but I am bankrupt even in thanks. Alas, fate destines us to incur courageously obligations which we can never repay."
"A grateful heart is more than words," said her father, "and in that, my child, I know you will never be deficient. But to whom we are indebted for such kindness?"
"Oh, I am the King of Ireland," said Roderick, smiling, "surnamed the Devil's Favourite here in Spain."
"Is it possible?" cried M. de Malet. "Do I indeed see the illustrious Roderick?"
"And this," continued Roderick, without noticing his exclamation, "is my friend Mr. Montague, an Englishman, whom, like many of his countrymen, not contented with enjoyment of every luxury at home, rambles into foreign climes, to grumble and find fault with everything he may chance to meet." "Do not believe him, madam," cried Edric. "My countrymen are fond of travelling, it is true, and may find fault occasionally with what they think is deficient in a strange land, but I assure you we travel from a desire of improving ourselves and acquiring knowledge, whilst we only find fault in the charitable hope that our censures may produce amendment." "That is, supposing your censures are just," replied Roderick, "but that we sometimes take the liberty to doubt."
I think nothing more reasonable than a man to censure their customs merely because they are not used to them," said M. de Malet. "For my part, when I travel, I make up my mind to be satisfied with everything, as I think I have no right to quarrel with inconveniences I have sought myself."
"It would be well," rejoined Roderick, "if all we were of your opinion, and if those who cannot be contented abroad should try to rest contented at home. But you speak as though you have travelled, and I think your daughter mentioned yesterday that you are strangers to Spain."
"We are Swiss," replied M. de Malet. "My name is de Malet, a name which you may have heard as belonging to the champion of liberty. Powerless as my efforts have been, I was a champion, and the reward of my labours is poverty and disgrace in a foreign land."
"But surely," said Roderick, "the Spaniards as a nation of freemen would receive a martyr for liberty with open arms, and would treat him as a brother."
"Yes, yes," replied M. de Malet bitterly. "I've had a tolerable specimen of their fraternal affection. They received me with protestations, fed me with delusive promises, and then left me to perish miserably."
Not designedly, dear father," said Pauline. "I do not suppose they left us to perish designedly." "Oh, no!" cried Roderick. "That must have been impossible. Tigers must have been moved to pity by that voice. They never could have intended to leave you to perish."
"Sire," replied M. de Malet gravely, "you forget my daughter and I. are but plain simple Swiss who are unused to flattery and to the language of courts. Do not then address expectations to us above our comprehension, which may lead us to forget the distance fortune has placed between us.
Do not speak of the difference of rank, interrupted Roderick impatiently. Beauty and merit, like that of your daughter, place her upon a level of a throne.
Pardon me, sire, replied Pauline, blushing and casting her eyes to the ground. I am perfectly aware of the humility of my station. I am aware that I am not born to be the companion of kings and princes, nor have I any wish to exalt myself above the situation in which nature has placed me. My duty is to my father, who led me to follow him to the Spanish court. It was the first that I had seen, and forgive me, sire, if I say I sincerely hope it may be the last.
But you must not judge us by the Spaniards.
I know it well, sire. Report has always spoken of the Irish hero who is noble, generous, and kind. Even his enemies have done justice to his merits, and the fame of Roderick has spread to every corner of the globe. I know he is incapable of treating my father as he has been treated by the directors of Spain, but I know also that he is so far superior to myself as to make his notice a condensation which I dare not flatter myself will continue, and of which I know myself perfectly undeserving.
Edric's eyes expressed his admiration, and Pauline's glowing cheeks proved she saw and understood their meaning. Roderick, however, was not quite as well pleased, and he felt himself rebuked, and Roderick did not like to feel himself in the wrong. "You are too modest," said he, then turning to Edric. "Edric," continued he, "have you an idea what has become of Dr. Entwerfen?" Then again, addressing himself to Pauline, he added, "Apropos, will you be very much amused with the learned doctor, Mademoiselle de Maillet, and I give you fair notice before you see him, that you must not laugh at him before his face, for Edric is tenacious of the feeling of his tutor as his own." Pauline's eyes expressed her approbation of Edric's delicacy upon this point, and as they met his, they conveyed more pleasure to his heart than language could express. From this moment, Pauline and Edric seemed to understand each other, for they felt there was a community of feeling between them. The mute intelligence of the eyes sometimes says more than whole years of a commonplace intercourse, and thus Pauline and Edric felt like old friends, though they had scarcely exchanged half a dozen sentences.
"Was that not the gentleman that relieved me from my swoon?"
asked M. de Maillet. Before Roderick had time to answer, an officer rushed into the room, looking a very image of despair, and approaching Roderick, bent his knee before him. "Thank you for the hydrate." "What is the matter?" cried the monarch sternly. "Speak, if you have committed a fault. You have less to fear from my justice than my mercy, for misplaced leniency only encourages crime."
"Pardon, sir,"
exclaimed the officer, still kneeling. But, speak, no evasion."
"Your Majesty commanded that we should watch that no harm happen to Dr. Entwerfen, and he has been taken by the enemy."
"Fool! Dolt! Blockhead!" cried Roderick, and taking leave of M. de Maillet and his daughter, he and Edric hastily quitted the tent. The bowls of the Irish king had given the doctor were simply formed of dough, the same as that being used to make bread, with only an addition that there was a bit of quicksilver rolled up into the center of each. This the merry monarch knew. As soon as it was exposed to the action of heat, they would make dumplings dance about as though they were bewitched, and he anticipated great amusement from seeing the doctor's exertions to keep them in the pot, and his despair at not being able to do so. To prevent the possibility of mischief, however, he had desired a select guard to keep watch over the unfortunate philosopher, and never to lose sight of him, taking care to prevent, if possible, his being exposed to any danger. These fellows, however, did not perform their duty, and it was to their intelligence that the unhappy fate of the doctor was owing. The moment the doctor had received the fatal balls, he hastened to the cauldron and, hastily kindling a fire, began to try the experiment. The balls more than answered Roderick's expressions, for as soon as they were affected by the heat, they began to jump out of the pot, one after the other, with the most determined perseverance. The doctor was in a violent heat from being exposed to the steam of the cauldron, and he threw off his coat to cool himself. His wig also slipped off, in his exertion to recover the provoking balls, and being obliged to skip after them with the utmost agility as they bounced rolling along. No sooner had he caught one and put it back in the pot, than another would jump out and begin anew of his vagaries. The doctor, though tired and provoked, did not, however, relax his labors, even for an instant, and he was running, panting, and out of breath after one of these mercurial harlequins, when he stopped by a rough arm, whilst a man in a gruff voice demanded what he was doing there. The doctor looked up, and finding with horror that he was surrounded by 8 or 10 armed Spaniards, answered in trembling accents,
That you was making gunpowder.
"Gunpowder!" exclaimed one of the men.
But what were you doing with those balls?
"I was boiling them," replied the doctor with great awe.
You seem to be playing with them, I think, assured the man. You were running after them to make gunpowder?
Yes, they wouldn't stay in the pot, and I was obliged to run after them to catch them.
The soldiers burst into a hoarse laugh at his naive reply, and their merriment offered a ridiculous contrast to the doctor's woeful visage. They now prepared to retire, dragging the doctor with them, totally heedless of his supplications for pardon and declarations of innocence. They declared him to be a spy, and swore that they would hang him as soon as they could get within the town. The soldiers who were appointed to guard the doctor, by who, indulging in the comfortable game of piquet, had neglected their charge, now came up, and, dismayed at seeing the doctor in the custody of a force too considerable for them to engage with, fled to inform their sovereign, trembling, however, all the time at the consequences of their disobedience. When Roderick and Edric reached the plain, the group of soldiers with the poor doctor in the midst of them were just entering one of the gates of the town which they had made their sally. The rays of the setting sun fell full upon the poor doctor's bald head, shining face, and these, and his white shirt-sleeves, were raised in his hands in a supplicating manner towards the heavens, made him a conspicuous object, even at a distance, till he was hidden from the sight of his friends by the heavy gates closing upon him. Roderick and Edric were in despair at the loss of their favourite, and to see him dragged away so barbarously without having the power to assist him was enough to try the philosophy of a Stoic. It was no wonder, therefore, that it was too much for the patience of the Irish hero, who had rarely known disappointment or control. He raved, stamped, and was unable to contain his rage, ordered an instant attack of the place. The enemy, imagining the Irish too much fatigued for the battle they had just fought, the assault to the town that night, were far from expecting an attack, but encouraged by the successful opposition they had made before, they received the assault with firmness and repulsed it with vigor. The cannon roared with tremendous fury on both sides, and the whole columns of men were swept away as grass falls before the scythe. The impatience of Roderick increased every moment, and the discharge from the petard having set fire to the wooden bulwarks of the town, he threw himself upon the blazing breach, sword in hand, and heedless of the crackling timbers and fast spreading flames, whilst Edric and some of the most devoted soldiers followed him, and they were soon warmly engaged with the Spaniards who opposed their entrance upon the walls. A loud shout from below, however, soon engaged their attention, and they besieged had made a sortie of means in the covered way, and Edric and his royal friend, finding their retreat would be cut off if they stayed, were reluctantly compelled to retire with their followers. Roderick, indeed, was struck down by a Spanish soldier whilst in the act of leaping from the walls. The soldier, seeing the effect he had produced, was about to repeat his blow, and the Irish hero must have perished before he could have recovered himself, if Edric had not interposed and received a gash instead of his friend. Then, instantly turning round, he cut the soldier, and in the meantime Roderick had revived, and he and Edric fought their way back to the rest of their enemy. It was now getting quite dark, and the besieged falling back within the town, the army of the Irish Monarch returned once more to their camp. "How provoking!" cried Roderick, the moment they entered the tent, taking off his helmet and giving it to Alexis the page. "I shall never be happy again if they hurt the doctor. Take my sword also, Alexis. But what is the matter with the boy? Methinks he looks wondrously pale, does he not, Edric?" Then, turning to Edric, he was excessively shocked to see the change in his appearance. It had been stated, as Edric received the blow from the Spanish soldier intended for Roderick, the wound had bled profusely, and the blood having congealed, the flow had stopped, and Edric, aided by his own courage and presence of mind and firmness, had been unable to sustain himself until he had reached the tent. Now, however, that necessity for exertion had ceased. His pallid looks and ghastly countenance bespoke that he had suffered. He had received one horrid gash upon the temple, and the coagulated blood upon his face and hair contrasted frightfully with the whiteness of the rest of his face. In fact, he looked the ghost of some poor murdered wretch appearing on the implore of vengeance upon his destroyer. He had seated himself at the table, resting his arms upon it, and supporting his head with his hands. He attempted to smile in answer to Roderick's inquiries. "Hey, Doctor." "So, how's the rest of your stream?" You lost? How far did you get, though? Or how far in debt did you get? Well, the game is finished. That is a good thing. I guess this is usually when people go, "Hi, everyone. If you don't know me, I'm Ken from Valkyrie, the Wolf Storyteller." And that's what I do. I tell stories and occasionally play games. Anyway, that's the introduction. Oh, that's an interesting introduction, Kel. "Wake up, sheeple. The Pixel Doctor claims to be a chill Tanuki VTuber, but I see through their lies. They say they're just gaming and vibing, but why are they always drawing and singing too? Don't believe the relaxing facade. This 18-plus raccoon is clearly up to something with all these retro games and waifus. Are they training us for something? Stay vigilant, comrades." Frosty Tools has some interesting introductions. I didn't realize I left it on conspiracy theories. Well, have a good night's sleep. Actually get some rest. Actually sleep. And hopefully you have a good work day tomorrow. Probably see you then too. And thank you for leaving me with the crowd, which means I probably rated it in here too, because I was lurking in your chat. Well, it's funny when I show up as a raider in my own chat. But yes, have a good night, Doc. He had seated himself at the table, resting his arms upon it, supporting his head with his hands. He attempted to smile in answer to Roderick's inquiries, but the effort was too much for his already exhausted strength, and his head fell heavily upon the table. Roderick flew to support him, and dispatched Alexis for a surgeon. "My dear Edric," cried he, "speak to me, for God's sake, speak to me! Do not let me think I've destroyed my friend! Oh, Edric, 'tis Roderick calls! Speak, speak, for God's sake, speak!" Edric was, however, incapable of speaking, and the torture of the Irish king when he found his friend could not answer him was beyond description.
My beloved Edric, exclaimed he, wringing his hands in an agony of grief, I implore you to answer me. Alas, he cannot. He is no more. Curses on my folly. I might have been blessed and happy, but in pursuit of the phantom glory I have sacrificed all I've ever loved on this earth. Oh, would to God that I had never visited Spain.
A heavy groan behind him startled Roderick as he finished speaking, and turning round he beheld Alexis, who now returned with the surgeon. The boy's appearance was singular. His complexion was usually clear dark brown, for his rich glow of color, and remarkably full of rosy lips. Now the deep color of his cheeks remained unfaded, but his lips had assumed a ghastly livid hue. His limbs trembled with agitation, and dark mysterious expressions seemed to sit upon his features. Roderick looked at him with amazement and almost horror. A strange suspicion arose in his mind respecting him. Before the Irish army had left Cadiz, it had been whispered that the Duke of Medina's claims to the throne was at least equal to that of the prince whom Roderick was fighting to establish. The Duke, indeed, had many partisans, but his age and blindness enfeebled his efforts. An express from Cadiz had been brought to the intelligence that the Duke was dead. As Zoe was now his sole heiress, this extraordinary agitation of her page looked at least suspicious. I must be aware of him, thought Roderick, regarding him attentively, for Zoe knows, notwithstanding my obligations to her, I shall never permit any monarch to reign in Spain but Don Pedro whilst I live. My life will be the first sacrifice required to her cause. Thus mused Roderick, though it was but for an instant that even the dread of personal danger could divert his thoughts from his friend. The surgeon, when he probed Edric's wounds, however, declared the great joy of the king that they were not dangerous, and that he had only fainted from loss of blood. He was now placed upon the couch in the same tent that, with the king and Roderick, soon after stretching his fur mantle under him, threw himself upon the bed, if not to sleep, at least to muse upon the eventful occurrences of the day. In the meantime, Dr. Entwerfen was forcibly dragged by the Spanish soldiers towards a kind of town hall in one of the principal squares of Seville, where, on the platform or dais, raised a little above the floor, sat the sapient magistrates of this town. When the prisoner was brought before them, they all put on their spectacles and observed him attentively, examining his bald head with the most scrupulous exactness. "Here's a lump of a spy," said one. "And here that of a rogue," rejoined another. "Yes, the organs of observation and self-appropriation," resumed the first, "are strongly developed, and that head is enough to hang an angel."
"Alas, alas!" cried the poor doctor. "Would to heaven that I had not lost my wig!"
"It would have been to no avail if you had retained it," said one of the judges gravely, "as it would have been forcibly removed, and even if you had worn your own hair, you must have had your head shaved, for knowledge of general contemplation and inaccuracy of witnesses. The judges of this enlightened court reject verbal testimony altogether, and form their correct and infallible judgments upon the sure and undeviating basis of that profound and useful of sciences, craniology."
"And happy are the prisoners judged by so wise a rule," said another.
"Yes," rejoined the third, "for the minds of weak men are weak, and the judgments liable to err. The broad and general principles of science must ever remain unchangeably the same." In this manner they went on, whilst the poor doctor, looking ruefully from one to another, as they severely pronounced their opinions, stood a very image of despair. "Let us question him," resumed the first magistrate. "What were you doing when you were taking?"
"I was making gunpowder," replied Dr. Entwerfen.
"The wretch!" exclaimed all the judges together. "He acknowledges he was manufacturing weapons for our destruction." "And how were you making this gunpowder?" resumed the judge.
"I was boiling it,"
moaned the doctor. "Boiling it!" exclaimed the judges. "What a villain!" And they all shook their wise heads in concert. The poor doctor could not bear this, and throwing himself upon his knees, begged stoutly for mercy. "In my opinion," said one, "we should be guilty of a crime of letting him escape."
I think so too, cried another. I would not have such a sin upon my confidence for the world, exclaimed the third. Whilst the unfortunate doctor, reading his condominium in their countenances, groaned aloud in the agony of his spirit. At this moment, the deep, awful roar of a cannon was heard, and Dr. Entwerfen leaped to his knees. Thank God! Thank God! Cried he, strutting up and down and wiping his forehead with his pocket handkerchief, as the continuation roar of the cannon rolled awfully along, rebounding from house to house and shaking the very count in which they stood. The magistrates looked aghast, whilst their pallid lips and trembling limbs told them that, however great they might be in council, their courage was not particularly conspicuous in the field. The doctor, in the meantime, kept ejaculating, I'm safe! I'm safe! See what a thing it is to have a friend for a sovereign, too! No, no! What did I say? A sovereign for a friend? I mean, aye, that's it! That's it! Thus did the doctor exult, whilst the citizens crowded around their chiefs, begging for directions, and not knowing whether to fly for safety. In this dilemma, the exclamations of the doctor extracted their attention, and, enraged to see him rejoice in their misery, the magistrates ordered him to prison, whilst they consulted as to what steps it was to be advisable to take. The poor doctor's joy was thus quickly changed to grief, and he lamented loudly his foolish transports of delight, without which he might have perhaps passed unnoticed in the crowd. It was too late, however, for repentance. The command had gone forth, and the unfortunate doctor was dragged away to a loathsome dungeon. The assault was, as we have seen, repulsed, and it being too late, when it was over, to think of hanging Dr. Entwerfen that night, the magistrates retired to their beds, determined to have him executed first thing in the morning. All was now still. The plain between the camp and the city, which had so lately echoed with the heavy tramp of horses and human beings, now slept tranquilly in the moonlight, undisturbed, save by the groans of some expiring wretch, or by the busy labors of those employed to remove the dead and relieve the wounded. Roderick had thrown himself upon his couch and dozed, but in a disturbed slumber, whilst Alexis, placed at the table, was writing dispatches from the dictation of Don Alvarez de Reparda, who had returned from the pursuit, and sat opposite him, whilst Lord Arthur O'Neill nodded at his side, and Edric lay reclined on another couch a little distance, near the opening of the tent. All was silent, save for the whispered voice of the Spanish general, the heavy breathing of Lord Arthur, and the measured steps of the sentinel as he paced his weary round. Edric listened until he grew tired of the same sounds falling uninterruptedly into his ear, and turning on his couch, tried to divert his attention by gazing upon the objects before him. The strong light of the lamp placed upon the table fell upon the fine features of Alexis as he looked up to the Spaniard, and Edric thought, as he gazed upon him, that he had seen those features before, though where he could not remember. Fatigued with the effort of trying to recollect, he turned to survey the noble Roderick as he lay gracefully stretched upon his couch. One arm was raised above the pillow, and the other fell carelessly by his side, whilst the fine contour of his head and neck was fully displayed, the rich, thick, glossy curls that generally hid his forehead being back. His coral lips were half open, and his long black eyelashes fringed his closed eyelids, whilst his dark whiskers and mustachios, with the rich brown tint that glowed upon his cheek, contrasted finely with the whiteness of his throat. God bless him, thought Edric, and send him all the happiness he deserves. And then, seeming fearful to disturb him, he looked again towards the town. The curtain of the tent was partly leaped up, and Edric watched with interest the lights of those still employed in their several duties of burying the dead and relieving the wounded. The figures of the persons engaged in these painful duties was frequently imperceptible, and the lights guiding to and fro, apparently without any human means, looked like ignis fatuae, or an assemblage of ghosts at their infernal revels. Edric sighed as he surveyed them, and his thoughts flew back. He knew not what the connection of ideas to his native land, and thought of his father, his brother, of the good old Duke of Cornwall, and Rosabella and Elvira, till one by one the lights appeared to fade away, and the images that floated before his fancy became gradually fainter and fainter. With thoughts more confused, the scene before him faded rapidly from his sight, and, in short,
He was fast sinking into repose when he was roused by a slight sound, and looking up, saw the Spanish general and the Greek page standing by his bedside. Edric roused himself immediately, though he still pretended to slumber. The recollection of all he had heard respecting the Duke of Medina, Pedro, and the Princess Zoe, mingled with the suspicions that had been breathed into a mysterious page, flashed across his mind, and effectually destroyed all inclination to sleeping. Indeed, a cold shudder ran through his frame as he remembered, with horror, that if anything were designed against Roderick, the first step of the conspirators would be to destroy him. From his known devotion to the Irish Monarch, and that, in his present enfeebled state, he was quite incapable of resistance. His blood seemed to run more feebly through his veins, and he panted for breath while he listened attentively, and heard the Spanish general whisper, "He sleeps, but not soundly enough for our purpose." An icy thrill seemed to chill Edric's heart, and involuntarily he heaved a deep sigh. The supposed conspirators started, then retired. Edric, now completely roused from his slumber, gazed after them, as with creeping, stealthy steps they glided across the plain, astonished at what he had seen and heard. Edric lay lost in bewildered speculations, but soon a new object caught his attention. Thick, black, pointed columns of smoke rose from the town, through which, at first red glow, and afterward sparks, appeared at intervals. At first, Edric could not imagine what this was, but rubbing his eyes, he almost fancied he was seeing a display of fireworks. But presently, long spiral columns of flames burst through the smoke, and uniting in one immense body of fire, rose up to the heaven, and seemed to swallow up the devoted city. The moment the flames broke forth, Alexis and the Spanish general hurried back to the tent, and Roderick sprang from his couch when he heard their hurried footsteps. "What's the matter?" he cried, rubbing his eyes, half blinded by the sudden glare of light. "The city is on fire!" exclaimed 1,000 voices at once, and Roderick rushed forth to the plain. The air felt hot and scorching. "Save them! Save the inhabitants!" cried Roderick. "Promise them quarter, peace, anything to save them! Let all the soldiers fetch water from the river, and I will have no plunder. He dies who touches an article belonging to the town, and injures a single creature escaping from it. Let us fight like men. It is beneath us to take advantage of misfortune." The orders of Roderick were promptly obeyed as given, the monarch leading himself the way to the town, and assisting in endeavoring to quench the flames. The gates were thrown open, and men, women, and children rushed forth, half naked, and received and supplied with food and shelter by the army of the Irish hero. The Irish adorned their sovereign. His valor, his rashness, and his romantic generosity won their hearts, and even his most discontented soldiers loved whilst they blamed him. Thus his will was law. Nay, there was something so noble in his orders that his soldiers were proud of implicitly obeying them, and not the meanest slave of the camp would have presumed to violate them in the slightest instance. The flames now caught some of the cotton mills of the river, which had been spared from the previous conflagration, and they burst forth in fresh volumes of fire, as the light material it contained added fuel to the flames. The buildings in the town were mostly old, many of them wood, and some were large warehouses filled with the most combustible substances, which burnt with added fury as the long pointed flames lapped them into their devoted vortex, curling around them and wrapping them in columns of fire as they, one by one, fell victims to their rage. The town was now half destroyed, and the flames were fast approaching the citadel. The governors of the city had been roused from their beds and had taken refuge, half naked, in the camp of Roderick, but the prisoners yet remained in the citadel, shut up, however, in dungeons below the surface of the earth. Roderick had anxiously inquired every one for Dr. Entwerfen, and at last, to his infinite horror, he learnt that he was in the fated citadel. He rushed forward in agony to save him, for he knew that the powder was kept there, and he was aware, too, that the flames had already seized the fortress. Long ere he could reach it, indeed, a tremendous explosion took place. A vast burst of fire rushed forth, scattering red flaming furniture, bricks, pillars, and every kind of rubbish in all directions, and then all sank to comparative darkness. The fire seemed to have spent its fury in its last effort, and though it was still feebly crawling along in the half-smothered flame, its violence had passed. Dreadful, however, was the scene that now presented itself, for Seville was leveled with the dust. Black, disfigured, smoky ruins supplied the place of what had once been lofty towers and sumptuous palaces. The splendid cathedral that had stood within the rage of centuries was now no more. The human bodies lay in the streets, and thrown in heaps, some half-burnt and others blackened and dried by the scorching fury of flames. Roderick, however, stayed not to examine the effects of the fire. He rushed over heaps of yet hot ashes and threw himself amongst the still smoking ruins of the citadel. A Spanish soldier, whom he had saved from the destruction only a few minutes before, was his guide, and under his direction Roderick hastened to the dungeons. He hurried from one to another, releasing the unhappy wretches confined there, searching everywhere for the doctor, but in vain. At last he heard his well-known voice. The dungeon door was thick, but it could not resist the impatience of Roderick. He could not wait for the soldier to assist him to open it. He burst the fastenings asunder, and in an instant the poor doctor, sobbing with joy, was locked in the monarch's arms. Some of the soldiers of Roderick had followed him to the citadel, and he left them to it and the Spaniard to release the other prisoners, whilst he returned with the dear doctor in triumph back to the camp. Okay, I had to pause the ads twice, but now I'm going to have to let him run. So, hopefully see you in a few. Okay, welcome back everyone. Thank you for sticking around if you're still here. So Edric has gotten to learn the highs and falls of war. And the doctor, prisoner and rescued again.
Why he seems to get in so much trouble, I just can't imagine.
It wouldn't have been so bad if you hadn't been cheering on his rescue and got noticed. Anyway, let's continue. Chapter 25. When Roderick and Dr. Entwerfen returned to the camp, they found Edric most impatiently awaiting their arrival. He was too much agitated to speak, and the worthy doctor found all his trouble was amply repaid by the interest his friends took in its welfare. Whilst Dr. Entwerfen was employed in relating his adventures to Edric, Roderick was occupied by a task far more difficult and important than he had ever yet undertaken, that of organizing and providing for a disorderly magnitude that had thronged into his camp from the city. Their number was immense. Men, women, and children crowded round the deliverer, falling upon their knees, blessing him and kissing the edge of his garments. Roderick was affected even to tears. "For heaven's sake, my good friends," he said, "spare me. I have done but my duty. I have been but a humble instrument in the hands of Providence. Address your thanks to him. They are their due." Roderick, however, was quite aware that it was not enough to have saved these poor people, for he knew that he must do something to provide them with food and lodging, and that if he did not, when the first moment of enthusiasm should be past, unpleasant scenes must inevitably take place. They accordingly made dispositions to this effect, with a prudence and sagacity that would have done credit to far more advanced years. Temporary huts were erected until the streets of Seville could be cleared of the ruins that encumbered them, and the houses in some measure repaired. Shelter for the inhabitants thus being provided, Roderick harangued the magistrates, directing them to take the people under their direction. The sapient ministers of justice gladly gave him possession of the town, which Roderick was too generous to assume without their permission, and acknowledged themselves and the garrison prisoners of war. The peasants, when they found the kindness of which the citizens had been treated, flocked in with provisions, and the camp in the Irish Monarch soon resembled an immense fair. Alexis had followed his master during the whole of these arrangements, and had frequently sighed deeply with as proceeded. "What is the matter with the boy?" said Roderick in one of these moments. "I cannot imagine why he looks so melancholy." The boy enthusiastically clapped his hands together, looking up to the heaven, though murmuring in inward prayer. "What can this mean?" exclaimed Roderick with astonishment. The boy took his master's hand, pressing it first to his lips, and then vehemently to his heart, and knelt before him, reverently bending his forehead to the earth. The next moment, however, offers entering the attention of Roderick was diverted, and Alexis forgotten. In the meantime, M. de Maillet and his daughter, who had been exceedingly agitated by the events of the day, thought not of repose, but sat in the tent prepared for them, conversing upon the merits of the deliverers.
"I never saw a finer countenance," said M. de Maillet. "So noble, so animated, and yet so good."
"Good indeed," ejaculated his daughter. "Surely we must believe a superior spirit would ever descend upon earth. Such would be the form he would assume."
"And how kindly he spoke, and how considerately!" exclaimed her father.
"How attentive he seemed, and how delicate!"
"Such a majestic figure!
"Such a graceful manner!"
It is so rare to find such condensation in so great a monarch."
"Monarch!" cried Pauline. "Were you speaking of Roderick, father?"
"And whom were you speaking of, child?" returned her father, turning quickly around, fixing his eyes upon her.
Of Mr. Montague, father,"
replied Pauline, casting down her eyes and blushing deeply.
"Pauline!"
said M. de Maillet. She started at the sound of her father's voice and looked timidly up at his face.
"Pauline!" repeated he. "My dear child, beware!"
this moment, a roar of cannon shook the tent, and the sound echoed at the walls of the town, leaping from hill to hill in lengthened peals. Pauline sunk upon her knees, hiding her face in her father's lap.
My child, my beloved child,
cried M. de Malay, bending over her as though to shield her from danger.
Heaven defend thee!
In this painful situation, the father and daughter continued until the cannonade ceased, and all was still, and awful was the calm that succeeded in such a tumult. Pauline raised her head and looked fearfully round.
Come, my child, said her father, let us endeavor to ascertain who are the victors.
Pauline rose from her knees, and, leaning on her father's arm, accompanied him into the opening of the tent. But she shrunk back, shuddering at the horrid scene that presented itself. Their tent was situated at the extreme edge of the camp, and commanded a view of the whole field of battle where the combat from the morning had taken place. The plain that stretched to their left lay covered with bodies of the dying and the dead, whilst multitudes of horses, broken loose, galloped over the field, plunging, snorting, and crushing beneath their hooves the bodies of their fallen riders. In some places the branches of half-broken trees strewed the ground, whilst their mutilated trunks, perforated with shot, remained as melancholy relics of their former beauty. The swords and helmets mingled with overturned wagons, and military utensils of all kinds were scattered in wildest order around. The earth, ploughed up by the cannon-balls in deep furrows where the ridges had been beaten flat by the feet of the combatants, looked wild and uneven as the waves of the mighty ocean arrested in a moment of tempest. Blood lay in pools upon the ground, and clotted gore, mingling horribly with remnants of human bones and brains, hung to the still-standing bushes, disfiguring the fair face of nature. Pauline shuddered, and turned eagerly to the other side of the landscape which commanded a view of the town. Here still, however, she found nothing but death and war. It was a moment when the explosion of the petard set fire to the wooden bulwark, and Roderick and Edric leaped through the flames upon the beach. The bright glare of the blazing bulwarks relieved strongly their dark figures, and Pauline distinctly saw and recognized them for a moment, though the next they were lost in a cloud of smoke. She screamed and grasped her father's arm in convulsive agony. M. de Malay was scarcely less agitated than herself, and as the smoke cleared away, they saw distinctly through the flaming volumes Roderick and Edric upon the breach, opposed by a crowd of Spaniards and fighting with inveterate fury.
Roderick is on his knees, cried M. de Malay. But see, he rises suddenly and plunges the Spaniard who had raised his sword to cut him down into the flames.
Pauline did not speak, but she gasped for breath and held her father's arm yet more tightly than before. Edric was now seen grappling hand in hand with the Spaniard, and the fire and smoke closed upon him and hid him from their view. The next instant a tremendous crash was heard, and loud shouts, followed by a rush of men. It was a sortie of the besieged.
"Oh, heavens!"
cried Pauline, turning pale, resting her head upon her father's shoulder.
"War is a dreadful thing."
"You are faint, my child," replied M. de Malay. "This is no fitting scene for you. Shall we go in?"
"Oh, no, no,"
cried Pauline feebly.
"I cannot leave the spot."
Here the shouts of Roderick, Roderick forever, Roderick in glory, rung in their ears. Pauline shuddered, and a faint sickness crept over her. The scene seemed to swim before her eyes, and she would have fallen but for the supporting arm of her father. At this moment some soldiers, carrying the bier, passed a little distance from the tent. Upon it lay the body of an officer, his head flung back. His long thick hair was matted with gore, and a ghastly wound gaped on his uncovered breast. Pauline could bear no more. She thought it was Edric, and she fell fainting into her father's arms. M. de Malay bore her back to the tent, and as soon as she was sufficiently recovered to enable him to think of anything but herself, he dispatched one of the soldiers, appointed to attend them, to ascertain if the Irish Monarch had escaped. The soldier did not return, and M. de Malay, too impatient to remain in his tent, sallied forth to learn the news himself. Scarcely was he gone, however, when the soldier's wife, whom he had called to the assistance of Pauline, perceived the town was on fire. Pauline's agitation now became excessive, and she trembled in every limb, and listened till the sense of hearing seemed agony. She could not comprehend the cause of the noise and bustle made by the citizens as they came crowding out of the camp. She looked forward, but the throng of half-naked men, women, and children that came hurrying along seemed inexplicable. She stopped a woman who was half-dressed, who had her clothes tucked in one hand, whilst with the others she led the two half-naked children.
"What's the matter?" asked she. "Roderick!" cried the woman in belief. "God bless noble Roderick!"
"Where are you going?" demanded Pauline and the two young men, who were bearing between them a bed containing the sick father.
"Roderick!" shouted the pious Spaniards. "Heaven in its mercy, bless Roderick!"
Pauline was proceeding in her inquiries, though without the smallest hope of receiving a direct reply, the hearts and the minds of the Spaniards being so full of Roderick that no other name could find utterance from their lips, when she perceived her father.
"My dear father!" cried she, running to him. "Now I shall know all. What is the matter?"
"Roderick, the noble Roderick is safe," repeated M. de Maillet.
Charlene was chagrined. She longed to hear of Edric, and she envied for head's sake the renown of the Irish hero.
"Can you two speak of nothing but Roderick?"
she said, somewhat reproachfully.
"And of whom should else I speak?" replied her father. "Who else deserves to be spoken of? For surely he is the bravest, the noblest of men."
"I do not doubt that," observed Pauline coldly. "Every tongue utters his praise, every breast swells with gratitude of his goodness, and every hand is raised to heaven in prayers on his behalf." "How many persons killed?" asked Pauline.
"How can you ask such a foolish question?" replied her father. "Do you not see the ground heaped with the slain?"
"The persons of note, I mean."
"Let me see. I think they said that there were Generals H and M and Counts L, P, T."
"Oh!"
groaned Pauline impatiently. "And besides, I think they say Mr. Montague is seriously wounded."
"I feared so," sighed Pauline. "He is so brave."
"Yes, everyone says he is brave, but implores blessings upon his name, for he saved the life of Roderick."
Pauline's countenance had beamed with triumph at the commencement of his sentence, but it fell rather at the conclusion. She did not quite like her hero to owe his glory to anyone but himself. M. de Maillet continued,
"His bravery and nobleness of spirit were unequaled. Everyone praises him. There is certainly something very extraordinary in the character of the English. Their daring tempers and love of adventure lead them to quit peace and riches in their native country and to seek glory and distinction elsewhere. This Mr. Montague is really an exalted young man."
Pauline's eyes flashed joy. She felt she loved her father more than ever. She could have embraced him as he spoke, for the praise of Edric sounded as the sweetest music in her ears. Strange that so slight an acquaintance would have produced so strong a passion, but such is so inexplicable of love. Pauline now had patience to hear the explanation of her father representing Roderick. She even felt pressure in the repetition of his exploits, for he was a friend of Edric, and she retired the rest. Happy in herself and contented with all the world, having been first assured by her father that the surgeon confidently expected Edric would soon recover, Pauline, however, would have been very much puzzled to explain the cause of the excessive excitement that she felt. The situation of herself and her father was as hopeless as ever. They were still prisoners in a strange land, without fortune, without friends, but so little does happiness depend upon external circumstances that the breast of Pauline seemed to have been a stranger to it all now. After arranging everything for the comfort of the refugees and his own soldiers, Roderick took a few hours of hurried repose. When he rose in the morning, he sent his compliments to M. de Maillet and his daughter to demand permission to wait upon them. This was instantly and gladly accorded, and in a few minutes the Irish hero was in their tent.
"I console your majesty upon the situation of your friend," said M. de Maillet the moment he saw him. "I hope he is better."
The monarch smiled. He forgave the abruptness of the question in favor for the excellence of the motive, and he replied that Mr. Montague was fast recovering. "He regrets exceedingly," added he, "that it is not in his power to say his devoirs here," bowing to Pauline, "and while I can sympathize with him, I know what he loses." Pauline inquired modestly the particulars of the combat. Upon my word, madam, replied Roderick, I know very little about it.
I thought your majesty had been engaged.
That is the very reason. If I had not, the case might have been different. But as it was, I only just saw a great many people that tried to kill me, and a great many that I tried to kill, and the smoke hid the rest.
A very satisfactory account of the battle, upon my word, cried M. de Mallet, smiling. But other people saw more of your majesty's acts than you did yourself, and they say you performed prodigies of valor.
It is very kind of them to say so, said Roderick, for I'm sure it is more than they know.
Your majesty's modesty wishes to throw a veil over your valor, observed Pauline, but luckily it cannot be concealed.
Your praises, madam, would make a man a coxswain, replied the monarch. I own I have not the courage to refuse commendations from your lips. Pauline blushed. She fancied she had said too much, and now remained silent.
I cannot describe how much I admire your majesty's leniency to the inhabitants of the city, said M. de Mallet. It proves your benevolence is equal to your valor, though indeed it was a sound policy to act as you have done, for by this you have consolated the hearts of the Spaniards, whereas if you had exercised any cruelty they would have risen against you en masse. But this, I dare say, your majesty considered?
Indeed, replied Roderick, smiling. My majesty considered such a thing. I only thought as a man. I did not like to see my fellow creatures burnt to death or poignarded if they attempted to escape. I should not have liked it at all, if I had been in a similar situation, and so I did all in my power to save them. That is all I know in the matter. But to change the subject, I have a great favour to ask of you, Mademoiselle de Mallet.
What is that? asked Pauline. Your majesty has only to speak to be obeyed.
Oh, for heaven's sake, do not talk of obedience. It is I who should obey. I only ask a favour, and that is that you will permit me to bring Dr. Entwerfen to kneel at your feet and kiss your fair hand in token of his homage.
I would not advise Pauline to let him kneel, said M. de Mallet, laughing, as I fear if she does there will be some difficulty in getting him back up again.
Your majesty's commands, said Pauline.
Do not talk of commands, interrupted Roderick. I hate the word.
Your majesty's wishes, then, continued Pauline, smiling, shall be complied with.
This evening, then, cried the grey monarch, the doctor shall make his appearance. Till then, adieu.
Will your majesty have the kindness to be present? My best wishes to Mr. Montague for his recovery, requested M. de Mallet.
Certainly, replied Roderick, but I am to tell Edric that Mademoiselle de Mallet has no wishes for his welfare?
I wish, I hope, that is, I think,
stammered Pauline.
My daughter means her sentiments are exactly similar to my own upon the subject, said M. de Mallet gravely,
for he was not at all pleased with the interpretation he thought the king might put upon the embarrassment of his daughter. Very well, repeated Roderick provokingly. I shall tell Edric that M. de Mallet and his daughter think exactly alike of him. That is it not? M. de Mallet was about to reply when the king, nodding and waving his hand, bade them adieu and hurried away.
I don't know what to make of this Irish hero, said M. de Mallet the moment he had left them. With all his good qualities, there is something very strange about him. I don't know what to make of him.
Pauline sighed assent, though she did not know what to make of him very well, for she fancied he saw and ridiculed her partiality for Edric. This idea roused every spark of pride in her nature. She could not bear the thought of being supposed to give her love unsought, and she determined when she next saw Roderick to show her coldness and indifference when Edric is mentioned, how completely he had been deceived. When Roderick left the tent of M. de Mallet and returned to Edric, whom he found pale and feeble, "You are the happiest fellow in existence, Edric," he said. "I would willingly give all my glory, and even my demoniacal renown, that the Spaniards talk about so much, to be able to call up such blushes to the cheek of a beauty your name can arise. Oh, if you had seen Pauline! By heaven, she is the loveliest creature I have ever beheld in my life." As he spoke, Alexis, the Greek page, who had been crouching rather than sitting at the foot of Edric's couch, resting his head upon his hands, and looking absorbed in grief, uttered a faint cry and rushed out of the tent. "There's something very extraordinary about that boy," said Roderick, looking after him. "There is indeed," replied Edric, replied Edric, "and I have something I wish to communicate to you respecting him." And in a few words he related what had passed the preceding night in the tent. "Impossible!" cried Roderick. "You must have been dreaming, Edric. What communication would the boy hold with Alvarez? You know he is dumb. Besides, even if Alvarez were inclined to plot against me, his prudence and reserve to make a confidant of a beardless boy." "I simply relate the facts as they occurred," said Edric. "I do not pretend to explain them, but I can assure you I was neither dreaming nor delirious." "It is very strange," repeated Roderick, musing, "as it corresponds remarkably with what I have observed myself." For some moments he remained lost in thought, but it was not his gay and choice nature to suffer anything to depress him long, and the next instant Alexis was forgotten. The fall of Seville and the destruction of the armies sent to defend it produced a powerful effect upon the destinies of Spain. The Cortes again sends ambassadors to negotiate with the Irish hero, but taught by experience, he now received them haughtily, refusing to treat them with anything but as a conqueror. And to put his threats in execution, he determined to advance immediately upon Madrid. "We must follow up our victory," he said to Edric, after he had somewhat contemptuously dismissed the deputies from the shattered remnant of their allied army, who came to sue humbly at his feet of peace. "These people are treacherous beyond description. They do not understand leniency, and they must be treated with sword in hand. I am thoroughly tired of them. Their fickleness and uncertainty have disgusted me. I will therefore march to Madrid, establish Don Pedro as their sovereign, and then take my leave of them forever." "I'm rejoiced to hear it," exclaimed Edric. "You will then return to Ireland and devote your time to your own subjects." "I will try to satisfy them as well as I can, but as perfection cannot be expected all at once, you must not be surprised if some day I should fly off on a tangent and take it into my head to colonize the moon." Edric laughed. "If you promise to wait till then," he said, "I shall be satisfied." "You may not find my project so wild as it appears," rejoined Roderick. "The moon is a very pretty, mild, modest-looking planet, and I must own I should like amazingly to see what kind of inhabitants she contains. And if I should determine to go there, here is a gentleman who I am sure will quite be ready to accompany me." Dr. Entwerfen entered the tent as he spoke. "Of what was your Majesty speaking?" asked he. "Of a voyage to the moon," said Roderick. "Will you go with me?" "With all my heart!" cried the little doctor, rubbing his hands and looking all glee at the thought. "There, I thought so," said Roderick, laughing. "I should have thought the many adventures you have met with had cured your passion for traveling," rejoined Edric. "Cured him? Given him zest for it, you mean?" replied Roderick. "The appetite for traveling always grows with what it feeds upon, and though the doctor may boast, yet I do not doubt that he is just as eager to explore new places as ever." "Yes," returned the doctor, "I certainly did see Seville." "Part of it, my dear fellow, from the palaces to its dungeons," resumed Roderick. "Nay, I believe you were very near being indulged with the view from its ropes." The doctor did not quite relish this raillery. "I assure you, your Majesty—" "Apropos de bêtises," cried Roderick, interrupting him. "I had entirely forgotten I promised to introduce you to Mademoiselle de Mallet. We will go now. Will you accompany us, Edric? I am sorry to ask you to do anything so disagreeable, but I think it will be in the best descent to kiss hands and take leave, and all this sort of thing, before we set out to Madrid. Besides, it may be as well to make some kind of provision as to what to become of them in our absence." "Then you will not take them with you?" said Edric despondently. "Who ever heard of such a thing?" cried Roderick. "How could I possibly ask the lovely Pauline to endure the inconveniences of traveling with a camp? I really have not the assurance to attempt it." Roderick sighed deeply, and his countenance assumed an expression of so much melancholy that Roderick laughed immoderately.
I could not have believed it possible, said he, that you could ever become such a sighing siphon. The thing's incredible.
The pain of my wounds, said Edric, blushing, for even philosophers don't like being laughed at.
The pain in your heart, repeated Roderick, mocking him. But come, I can pity you. I've been in love at least 50 times myself, so I know how it is.
I am not in love, remonstrated Edric.
Denial is one of the most dangerous symptoms, resumed Roderick, gravely. Experienced physicians rarely think their patients really ill till they cannot conscious it of themselves. Let me feel your pulse. Said Edric impatiently.
Literally, that's what it says. It's pshaw.
Will you go then? Asked Roderick, laughing, and to avoid further tormenting by his revelry, Edric hastily rose from his couch and declared himself ready to attend him.
The injuries he had received, having only been flesh wounds inflicted with a saber, had now nearly healed, and the only change they had produced in his appearance had been to make him look more pale and interesting, one arm being supported by a sling, and a bandeau bound around his forehead. Pauline's eyes sparkled when she saw him, in spite of her intended indifference, and she could not command her voice so entirely, but that its tremulous tone betrayed her inward agitation. Edric's eyes also involuntarily expressed his pleasure, whilst the gay laugh and the arch look from Roderick told that he was perfectly aware of what was passing in each mind. Dr. Entwerfen, however, saw nothing of the kind, his mind being quite absorbed in the delightful contemplation of his own glory. He had been presented to M. de Mallet by Roderick as his friend and counselor, learned and justly celebrated Dr. Entwerfen, and the moment seemed a sufficient reward for a whole life of misery, the doctor's ecstasy upon the occasion being so unbounded that he neither knew what he did nor what he said. Whilst Roderick had been speaking, indeed, he had been a perfect agony, stretching himself out on tiptoe, opening his hand and closing them with every assistance, as though bursting with impatience to speak, that he might by his eloquence confirm the monarch's eloquium, yet trembling at every instant lest he should interrupt it. M. de Maillet had been a dabbler in scientific experiments in his youth, and pleased to find a person whom he could talk to and understand his ideas upon the subject, he drew the doctor on one side, leaving his younger friends to be enthralled by his daughter.
"I am glad, very glad to see you so soon recovered,"
said Pauline, addressing Edric in a gentle tone.
"I feared, that is, my father feared, your wounds were more serious."
"You see, Edric," said Roderick archly, "as I said, Mademoiselle de Maillet feels for you exactly the same interest as her father does."
"I should be flattered by exciting any interest in so gentle a bosom," sighed Edric, looking at her tenderly. Pauline sighed too, involuntarily, but remained silent. "Do you then feel no interest in my behalf?" continued Edric. "Not even the cold, chilling feeling sanctioned by your father?"
"Oh, call not the interest my father feels for you cold and chilling!" exclaimed Pauline with energy. "I am sure, that is, I think—"
And here, fearing she had said too much, she stopped abruptly, totally unable to proceed. "Oh, go on!" exclaimed Edric, gazing earnestly upon her blushing face. "Go on, I could listen to you forever." Pauline trembled, blushing, and hesitated.
I think I'd better go to my father,"
stammered she, after a short pause. Roderick smiled. "By all means," he said. "Don't you think so, Edric?" Edric did not reply, for in fact he did not hear the question, whilst poor Pauline's agitated increased, and her color changed rapidly every moment. She dreaded Roderick's raillery, and trembled so violently she could scarcely stand. At this moment her father returned, and looked at his daughter with some surprise, and then, turning to his guests, he apologized for her abstraction.
"My daughter is unused to camps," he said, "and the scenes she has lately gone through have been too much for her nerves."
"She will now have an opportunity to recover herself," replied Roderick. "My army will move forward tomorrow, and if you will accept the post, I will leave you as governor of the city, with a sufficient garrison to keep it on my behalf." Pauline turned deathly pale as he spoke, and every hope of happiness seemed to fly from her breast forever. M. de Maillet, however, was not at all aware of his daughter's anguish, and thanking the king gratefully for the high honor conferred upon him, his fancy began to revel in anticipation of the delights of governorship, and in 10 minutes he had arranged in his mind as many improvements and alterations as it would take 50 years to accomplish. "Farewell," continued Roderick. "I trust we shall meet again, if not here, at least in another and better world. Permit me, lady," he continued slightly, touching with his lips her pallid cheek, Pauline. "Tomorrow with the dawn we advance, and we have so much to do ere then that we must deny ourselves the pleasure of again enjoying your society. Farewell, Governor. You will find the necessary papers to install yourself here," giving him a packet, "and the soldiers have orders to obey you as myself. Come, Edric." Edric advanced, and bowing, took the hand of Pauline and pressed it respectfully to his lips. His heart was too full to speak. Pauline could scarcely retain her tears, and shaking hands with the doctor, she hastily retired to a part of the tent and closed for her use. "My daughter's not well," said M. de Maillet. "These scenes of blood and war were too much for her nerves, but she will soon recover when you have left us." "I doubt that," murmured Roderick in a half-whisper, as soon after his friends retired. Edric was not insensible to Pauline's emotion, and he more than suspected the cause, a pleasure, unknown before, throbbing in his bosom. His eyes sparkled, and his whole appearance presented so complete a contrast to his usual depression that Roderick could not resist the temptation of rallying him to the unmercifully upon it. "Talk of medicine," cried he. "There is no elixir like the magic of a pair of bright eyes. All the physicians in my camp can effect nothing like it. Nay, you need not blush so, Edric. I did not imagine you were so far gone as that." "I did not blush, that I am aware of," returned Edric, somewhat peevishly, for he did not relish being teased. "At least, I am sure of no occasion for blushing." "Well, then, don't you look like a bashful maiden disavowing her first attachments with a la pa? How can you think so? I did not suppose you were capable of such affection." "I am not aware that I have been guilty of any." "Come, then, own your own truth candidly. You love the Mademoiselle de Maillet." "How can you think so?" replied Edric, blushing deeply in spite of his efforts to look so composed. "You are indifferent to her, then? Dear me, I had no idea of it. I was never so completely deceived in my life. Oh, well, if that's the case, I will resume my first design in trying my own fortune." "How can you be so provoking?" "Why, it is very hard, if you do not love her yourself, that you should wish to prevent everyone else from being so. Your Majesty's rank, I should think, would prevent your even thinking of Mademoiselle de Maillet." "Why should my rank prevent the possibility of my being happy?" "Your Majesty's rank prevents the possibility of you marrying Pauline, and I should hope you should not dare to entertain dishonorable views disrespecting her." "Dare? Dishonor? Do you remember whom you are speaking to, Edric?" "Perfectly, for I have not forgotten Roderick, though he appears to have forgotten himself." "Edric, I won't be angry with you. When people are in love, they never mean what they say. In fact, they seldom know what they are talking about. I remember once when I was in love myself." I love the fact this conversation just flows that way. Alexis, who had waited at the entrance of the tent during the visit the master had paid to M. de Maillet, was now following them, sighed heavily at the remark. Roderick heard him. "What is the matter with you, boy?" he said. "Were you ever in love, Alexis?" The page sighed more deeply than before, and crossing his arms upon his breast, bent his head in a token of assent. "It is too much to be lamented you cannot tell us about it," continued Roderick, "for you could never choose a more fitting moment for such a tale, as you may depend upon the sympathy of Mr. Montague, even if I should be so barbarous as to refuse my mine. With petty faults to which we feel inclined, and to our proper failings can be kind, as one of your poets says. Edric, don't you think he's right?" "I think you are very provoking." "That is because I am touching upon a string that happens not to be quite in tune, and so no wonder it jars a little. Do you not remember the old proverb,
Touch a man whose skin is sound, he will stand and fear no wound. Touch a man where he is sore, he will start and bear no more.
Can you condescend to repeat such nonsense? Replied Edric indignantly. Is it unworthy the poorest beggar of your dominions?
And how can you be so condescend to be moved to such nonsense, Edric? Replied Roderick, laughing. Come, come, own the truth, for it is useless to attempt any longer to deny it. Say candidly that you are in love with Mademoiselle de Malay, and I will tease you no longer.
And love is too strong a term. I admire, esteem, and respect Mademoiselle de Mendeley. I even think her possessed with 1,000 charms and 1,000 virtues, but as to being in love...
Well, well, we will not quarrel about words. I do not think you will ever make a romantic lover. Englishmen are too reasoning and prudent to fall in love violently. Your blood is as cold as your climate. Now, we will take the thing quite differently. With us, love is a devouring flame, a fire that observes our whole being, a stream that sweeps everything before it, a madness, a delirium. In short, I don't know what it is.
Think not, said Edric dryly.
Pshaw, continued Roderick. If it could be described, it would not be worth feeling. It is all spirit, all soul. If you tie it down to rules, it evaporates. Don't you think so, Greece Celescus?
The page bowed, and shaking his head, pressed his finger upon his lips.
True, returned his master. I had forgotten, but if you cannot speak, you can write. Take these tablets. I should like to know your opinion.
The page took the tablets and wrote with astonishing rapidity. Since your majesty condescends to ask my opinion, I think that the love which can stay no reason, nor hesitates to sacrifice everything to the object loved, does not deserve a name.
Bravo, my little hero, cried Roderick, tapping him on the shoulder. Spoken like a true Greek. An Irishman, however, would have said nearly the same.
The boy's slender figure trembled in every nerve at his master's touch, and his cheeks were flushed with unwonted passion, though his eyes remained fixed upon the ground, from which indeed he rarely raised them. Roderick gazed upon him a few minutes in silence, as though he wished to read his inmost soul. Then, turning to Dr. Entwerfen, who had taken no part in the last conversation, he demanded gaily what he was thinking about.
I was thinking, your majesty, said the doctor gravely, that it is a long way from hence to Madrid, and that it is very fatiguing for young men to march so far.
Upon my word, doctor, said Roderick, laughing, you have really made the most sublime discovery, and I perfectly agree with you in the justice of your conclusions.
That being granted, continued the doctor, if any means could be devised by our enemy could be transported to the gates of the city without the trouble of walking there, it would be a good thing.
Certainly, said the king. The fact does not admit of dispute.
The only difficulty is to contrive how it is to be done, resumed the doctor, musing.
Aye, there's the rub, said Roderick, laughing immoderately. However, if anyone can do it, I'm sure you can, my dear doctor. So rally your energies and consider the best means of commencing operations. I'm sure, if you exert yourself, you cannot fail of success.
Your majesty does me an honor, and I will endeavor to prove I am not undeserving of your confidence you repose in me,
said the little doctor, drawing himself up to his full height and puffing out his cheeks, as he walked on absorbed in meditation.
I have it, cried he, suddenly stopping his work. What does your majesty think of an immense raft?
Excellent, my dear doctor. But I see 3 objections to making one large enough to convey a whole army. First, that we have neither the timber to make it. Secondly, we have no horses to draw it. And thirdly, the roads are not wide enough to admit it.
Balloons would have to do, but we have them not,
resumed the doctor, still profoundly cogitating, with his eyes fixed upon the ground and his hands in his breech pockets. What think you of packing soldiers up in bombs and shooting them out of mortars? Asked Edric.
Your majesty is pleased to jest, observed the doctor gravely, but ridicule is not an argument.
Oh, certainly not, replied the king. And if you mistake me greatly if you thought I meant to ridicule your plan, I only wish to remark that I feared it would be rather difficult to put it into execution.
That which can be accomplished without difficulty, said the doctor solemnly, is scarcely worth the trouble of undertaking.
and quite below the consideration of a man of genius. Difficulties to a man of science are but incentives to action.
Most sensibly observed, my dear doctor, said Roderick. However, we have now reached our tent, and I must leave you to contrive some plan to bring us back to Madrid, as I am afraid I cannot wait now to put your designs into practice to enable us to get there. We must march with dawn. Of course, you will accompany us.
Certainly,
returned the doctor, still musing, then muttering to himself,
I don't much like the plan of shooting off the soldiers. It would take such large mortars and so much gunpowder. However, there's no knowing what might be done. I will think of it.
He retired to his tent, though no sleep visited his eyes that night. So completely had the idea of packing up soldiers and bombs taken possession of his imagination. Roderick's arrangements were soon made, for nature had certainly intended him for a general. His intelligent mind foresaw everything, and provided against every contingency. Brave in the field and prudent in council, the only fault of Roderick as a soldier was that he sometimes suffered himself to be carried away by his ardor when it would have been wiser to delay. But his very impetuosity had its charms in the eyes of his soldiers, and he never hesitated to expose himself to the same dangers or to undergo the same privations as themselves, and they would have followed him willingly into the very jaws of destruction. After arranging everything for the morning's march, the Irish hero snatched a few hours of repose. With the dawn, however, the drums beat the revelry, and the Irish army left Andalusia to advance by rapid marches upon Spain. Okay, 2 more chapters now. The conversation between Roderick and Edric. That was just hilarious. And I just like bantering with myself, apparently. Oh. Let's just see whom we can raid. Do I want to raid another reader? If any are on. I'm not seeing any yet. At least out of my followed list. Well, I see one that's reading Potter. What is Obelisk reading? Ooh, Turn of the Screw. What do I say? We continue horror? Not that mine's really been horror lately. As mostly harmless, Obelisk really does like doing gothic horror. So, sound good? And if you like them, give them a like and follow. Add them to our list of readers. I think I spelled it right. Find out. Okay. It worked. So, I will see you all there, and I hope you all have a wonderful night.
In the hollow of the night, shadows weave and twist. The wolf has told his stories, wrapped in mystic mist. Lurking in the silence, endlessly sway. The hours drip like candle wax, slowly melting cold. Lands of frost and twilight, secrets yet untold.